The border crossing was a place of waiting, and waiting made people brittle. A wire fence stretched like a scar across the dry earth, its metal links rattling whenever the wind shoved through. Guards in fatigues paced slowly, eyes scanning passports, faces, bags, questions repeated until they felt like echoes. Families huddled in uneven lines, clutching plastic folders filled with documents, photographs, certificates, the fragile paperwork of identity. Children cried from hunger or boredom, their small hands tugging at mothers' coats. Every cough, every shuffle of feet seemed amplified by the tension that hummed through the air. On this day, the sun had been merciless, glaring down on both sides of the fence until even shadows seemed thin. The line stretched long, a tired serpent of humanity, inching forward in jerks. Some prayed under their breath. Others argued with the soldiers, voices rising, then faltering into weary resignation. It was there, amid the noise of bureaucracy and exhaustion, that a man broke. He was not young, but not old. His face was carved with the lines of labor, his hands scarred by work too rough for gloves. He stood clutching a folder to his chest, papers slipping from the edges as his grip failed. His daughter, a girl no more than 7, clung to his leg, her eyes wide with confusion. He tried to steady himself, tried to keep his place in line, but the weight of something unseen crushed him, and suddenly, in front of strangers, he wept. Not the quiet kind of crying men sometimes allowed themselves, but full, wrenching sobs that bent his shoulders forward. The girl stooped to grab them, her own small hands frantic. People nearby shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to help or look away. Some averted their eyes, embarrassed by his rawness. Others watched with pity but kept their distance, the invisible rules of border lines too strong to break. Then another figure stepped out of the crowd. He was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with a steadiness that did not belong to the chaos of the border. He wore no uniform, only a simple coat, yet his bearing was unmistakable. Shoulders square, gaze level, each stride measured as if he had practiced walking with silence itself. The murmur spread quick. A tomb guard. What was he doing here, so far from the solemn marble of the monument he was sworn to protect? The weeping man did not notice him until the shadow fell across his daughter. She looked up first, eyes wide, then tugged at her father's sleeve. He raised his head, startled, meeting the steady gaze of the stranger. And before words could form, the guard bent and gathered the scattered papers, stacking them neatly with hands as careful as if they were folded flags. He placed them back into the folder and pressed it gently against the man's chest. The father tried to speak, but the sobs broke him again. His knees buckled, and he sank onto the dirt, his daughter's arms tight around his neck. The crowd shifted uneasily, some whispering, some staring, the guards at the checkpoint frowning in suspicion. And then the tomb guard did something none of them expected. He knelt, slowly, deliberately, lowering himself until he was level with the man on the ground. His hand came to rest on the father's back, steady and strong, and then with a tenderness that belonged less to ritual than to humanity, he pulled the man into an embrace. The square fell silent. The father clung to him, sobbing into the fabric of his coat, shaking as though the weight of his grief could finally be released. The guard held him firmly, not to restrain but to steady. His other arm reached around the child too, drawing her into the circle, shielding her small body against his chest. For a moment, the border ceased to exist. No fences, no uniforms, no papers, only a father, a daughter, and a stranger whose silence was louder than all the shouting in the world. People watched, transfixed. Some began to cry themselves without knowing why. A soldier at the gate lowered his rifle, staring with something like shame. A mother in line whispered a prayer. Phones rose hesitantly, capturing the scene, unsure whether it was too sacred to record or too important to forget. The guard said nothing. He simply held them until the father's sobs softened, until his breathing slowed, until the small girl loosened her desperate grip. Then, gently, he pulled back just enough to look at the man's face. He nodded once, a gesture of respect, as if to say, "You are seen. You are not alone." The man's lips trembled. He tried again to speak, but the words caught in his throat. All he managed was a broken whisper of thanks. The guard inclined his head, then rose, pulling the man to his feet with him. He placed the folder back into the father's hands, steadying his grip until it held firm again. The line moved forward, as lines always do, indifferent to the weight carried within them. But no one forgot what they had seen. Whispers spread along the queue, across the fence, through the crowd at the checkpoint. The guard embraced him. "Did you see? Why would he?" The answer was not yet known. And though no one could have guessed it yet, the truth behind that embrace would travel far beyond the barbed wire that day, crossing boundaries faster than news, deeper than politics, until it circled the world. All that remained in that moment was the image seared into memory, a sentinel of the dead holding a grieving father at the border. Silence turned into compassion, ritual transformed into touch. The moment lingered long after the embrace ended. The father clutched his folder as though it were suddenly lighter, though nothing had changed but the steadiness of his hands. His daughter wiped her eyes with her sleeve, still pressed against the guard's leg, unwilling to let go of the safety she had found there. Around them, the border crossing stood frozen, held in place by something invisible and undeniable. Eventually, the line resumed its shuffle. Papers were checked, bags inspected, commands repeated in clipped tones. Yet even the soldiers spoke softer now, their eyes flicking toward the guard as though reminded of something older than orders. The family moved forward, disappearing into the slow machinery of migration. But the image of that embrace remained, heavy in the air. It should have ended there. A fleeting gesture, a kindness witnessed by a handful of strangers. But kindness has a way of multiplying when silence guards it well. Phones had captured it. Not staged, not posed shaky videos taken by people who could not believe what they were seeing. Within hours, the footage spread. A tall figure in a plain coat, unmistakable in his bearing, kneeling in the dust of a border crossing to hold a broken man and his daughter. No caption could contain it. Words like hero and angel appeared in headlines, but the image outgrew them all. Reporters searched for answers. Who was the man who wept? Why had the guard been there? What truth lay behind a moment that seemed to belong less to politics and more to eternity? The answers came slowly, pieced together from whispers and records. The father's story surfaced first. His name was Elias. He had worked as a mechanic in a small border town, raising his daughter alone after his wife's illness claimed her 2 years earlier. When conflict spilled into the region, his shop was destroyed, his papers lost. He had spent months navigating bureaucracy, gathering the documents needed to prove what should never need, proving that he and his child deserved to live without fear. On that day, the folder he clutched contained his last hope, a birth certificate, a death record, a letter of recommendation from a local teacher, and a faded photograph of his wife. The weight of it, combined with exhaustion and despair, had broken him in line. He had not cried for himself, he later admitted, but for his daughter, terrified she would remember him not as strong but as defeated. And then the guard had come. When questioned, the tomb guard himself gave no interviews. He returned quietly to his post the very next day, standing as if nothing had happened. But those who knew him whispered his reason. Years earlier, he had stood watch over the tomb during a ceremony when a folded flag was handed to Elias's brother, another soldier, another name carved into stone. He remembered the father's face then, stricken with grief, clutching his daughter, who was too small to understand. The guard had watched in silence that day, unable to move, bound by duty. At the border, years later, he recognized them. He had not come to break rules. He had come because silence sometimes demands more than standing still. He had come because memory is not confined to marble. He had come because no father should crumble unseen. When this truth surfaced, the story spread even faster. Commentators debated the politics of borders, the role of soldiers, the symbolism of a guard sworn to the dead stepping forward for the living. But beyond debate, people wept. Families separated by distance shared the video across oceans. Veterans saluted their screens. Mothers whispered blessings over the guard's name, though he had never spoken it aloud. The Prime Minister himself addressed it days later, voice heavy with sincerity. One of our sentinels reminded us that our duty does not end at stone memorials. He showed us that sometimes, The greatest act of strength is to hold another person when they break. The image of the embrace was printed on front pages, shared as murals, painted by schoolchildren. In classrooms far from the border. It extends to every parent who fears for their child, every child who clings to hope. A statue was proposed not of the guard alone, but of three figures: the sentinel, the father, and the child, locked in an embrace that had stilled a border and stirred a world. When a journalist finally managed to approach him, breaking through the cordon of reverence that surrounded his watch, they asked, "Why did you hug him?" His answer was brief, his eyes fixed ahead. Because he was carrying more than he could alone. It was enough. But the guard asked for no monument. At the border, officers reported a change. Lines still moved slowly. Papers still demanded stamps, but tempers eased. Strangers began offering water bottles to children, helping elderly travelers with bags. A soldier was seen bending to comfort a crying child, instead of waving him aside. Small gestures multiplied, all echoing the silent embrace that had taught them what was possible. Elias and his daughter crossed that day. Weeks later, he wrote a letter that was published in newspapers. "I thought my daughter would remember me broken, but she remembers instead that a man, unknown to us, held us until we could stand. She tells everyone that soldiers guard not just stones but hearts. She is right, and because of him, I can stand again. The world did not forget." Remember what silence can do. And so the truth spread not as propaganda, not as politics, but as something deeper. A reminder that even in the harshest places, humanity is not lost when someone dares to hold it steady. Whenever debates about borders flared, whenever fear threatened to harden hearts, someone would bring up the video. "Remember the tomb guard," they would say.